Ryan,
Tony,
And
Crystal.
Now we can't guarantee that you're gonna look great, but if you wanna stay in shape, well, you better hit the GymWits.
That's right, man. You tell 'em.
welcome to the GymWits podcast. I'm Ryan George,
I'm Justin Guild, aka Chef Sonic.
and we are the GymWits. So we got a less than a week to go until the election. Have you voted yet?
No, I have to send in my have to send in my ballot.
Now, are you voting from Tennessee?
No.
or
I'm in New York.
still in New York. Okay. got it.
Although, like, truth be told, our vote doesn't matter technically. Like, I know theoretically it's not right to say that, but it factually it doesn't. Right? We know where our district is going to go. And
I would say functionally it has little weight, but in an election that is potentially contentious, if you are on the Democratic side, you almost need an overwhelming majority, both in the popular vote and in the electoral college, to kind of cement it and to not allow for any nefarious forces to come in and steal it. So in that way, I feel like, functionally it doesn't matter from New York. We're going to, it's a blue state, but I think just across the country, it needs to be such an overwhelming number that there's little reason to try to overturn it or change it. So in that way, I actually do think,
makes sense.
If he can win by 5 million or 6 million or 7 million, it's kind of hard, to argue that maybe we shouldn't count these, mail. I mean, granted, it's still going to come down to a couple states. So when it comes down to like the numbers,
Florida and Ohio and
Pennsylvania and all that stuff, but
interesting. I've always said this is that
I should just correction. Actually, when this goes up, it will be the day after the election. Now we may or may not know the winner at that point, but because we're recording this on Wednesday, the Wednesday before, but this won't actually be published until the Wednesday after. So
it's funny. So we'll know then,
but
or maybe we won't. So we'll see.
We probably won't. With the way the amount of mail-in ballots and everything that's going to happen with it, we might not know for a little while.
So I'm not a fan of the Electoral College.
Yeah, no, neither.
I think it's an antiquated system, and for anyone outside of the United States that may not know, the United States has figured out the only vote in the history of votes that is not determined by the number of votes counted, but rather by the regions of voting. And it's the only reason why is because when they first did the votes, they didn't have the technology to tally all the votes. So they approximated it. Right. It's just ridiculous if you ask me.
Well, it's supposed to be a check on, like, my old, one of my old history teachers say it's like kind of like the masses are asses. So like the Electoral College is kind of like a check on the people, so that if the people do something stupid, that's like a last go between to
as far as the electorates,
from a bad decision.
And not even that you're right, because the electorates don't even have to vote for who was voted for. They could go against it. So it's ridiculous. That's not democracy.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, also regardless, like it's not democratic, and one could argue that the most recent election was a situation which, if we're gonna have it, like who else can you elect, and then not have them step in and make the right choice? So I think in that way, it's antiquated, and it's unfortunate. Well, what is it, like 3 of the last 4? Well, like. Not the last 4, but we have, the last 2 Republicans that have been in office have not won by, or 2 of the last 3 times that a Republican has won an election, it's not won the popular vote. So there's, clearly a problem there. I don't know what's on the agenda. It should Democrats take over, but I would hope that there is a larger push to start to get rid of that, because it just doesn't make sense.
The other thing is, why can't people vote online? And I don't buy the whole. There's ways to rig it or hack it or not. It's like, come on, you have the best computer scientists, you have the best tech people, and trillions of dollars at your disposal. You can't figure out a way to vote online. It's ludicrous. I actually think that powers that be want to control the vote more, right? Or make it so that make it harder for people to vote. So should be an option. It's just ridiculous.
I don't know. I mean, I would be interested to see if there are any countries that currently do it. I'm sure you're right. I think there has to be a way.
Come on.
But I think implementing anything like that, it's got to be tested and almost 100% secure.
Yeah.
And I think that, I mean, just look at how much misguided fear there is over corruption with vote by mail.
Yeah.
Now imagine if you're doing that online.
Maybe it
I think it'd be really
maybe it makes it less.
I'm saying it might merit, whether or not it is. I think it's a tough sell for people because we're so used to things maybe, online being hackable.
But issues that we've seen in the past that have often affected communities with lower incomes, where people couldn't get to voting stations, elderly people that might not be able to get to the voting areas. Like it corrects some of those problems
potentially.
So and people could still vote live if they want.
Yeah, so, no, I think
it's just like,
maybe
come on,
we're 10 years away from that. Yeah,
all right, but let's
probably
start
10 years away.
Let's start
from
implementing.
I think it'll happen.
We have the
eventually.
technology very easily. We have the security. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I just think we're about 10 years away from that being implemented. But I think I would want to see if there are any states countries that currently do it, and how secure it is and what the weaknesses are. But anyway, we're a fitness podcast and not a politics one, even though we definitely, but this time of year, I mean, it's like all anyone can talk about is politics and COVID. So,
I have a question for you. So where do you put Khabib? Like, if you had to compare him to like a basketball player, like who would he be?
I'm trying to think. Okay, what's a good ad? Well, so why don't you explain Khabib in 2 minutes or less to listeners who don't know who Khabib is? While I think about what athletic comparison I would make.
All right, so Khabib Nurmagomedov, who just retired from the UFC, is most likely the greatest lightweight fighter and who ever existed. Right, he basically he retired undefeated. He was a champion. He beat all comers, and that's pretty much it. So when he retired, everyone was calling him the GOAT, which is certainly acceptable. Of course, John Jones, who in my opinion is the greatest mixed martial artist and fighter to ever walk the planet. He's the guy that if like aliens came down and like, we're going to conquer you unless you send your greatest gladiator, he is the person I would elect to fight them, fight someone in a cage.
Yeah.
So of course, and he's a real ass. Like he couldn't just with all his gifts, he couldn't just shut up about it. He has to cry. It's like, he's just such a not a good person. He's just not. Yeah. He's not zen. He's just not very cool for everything that he has. But but Khabib is definitely now up there. With the greatest to have ever participated in the sport.
So to answer, so a couple things. So when you mentioned, so basically, so John Jones is probably the greatest fighter we've seen, the greatest mixed martial artist ever. Especially you combine the skills with his weight class, like he's the greatest.
And
he's going to move up to heavyweight. He's never really he lost one fight, but it was a disqualification type of loss. Like he was destroying the person before he lost because of an illegal blow. So and even like in that case, like it wasn't really the illegal blow. The guy was already injured, but regardless, I think with MMA in general, whenever there's a new fighter or somebody comes out, we talk about them as, oh, maybe that's the greatest ever, and so that constantly happens where we have somebody who's like, oh, that person is the best, or the pound for pound the best, and
recency bias.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
what everyone does with LeBron James.
Bias.
Although LeBron
Exactly.
James is definitely
he's up there. I mean, I would
he's
there's
definitely
a
up in the top 3.
A
Yeah, I think he is.
argument can be made, but
And
regardless,
I don't love the whole eras thing because it's tough to compare eras. But
yeah, but
sorry,
okay. So you're perfectly recency bias is what happens a lot with MMA. So I think what people were saying is that Khabib has been dominant. He hasn't lost a fight in his career. He's beaten some of the best in a division that's just killers. Like that division, lightweight, doesn't get the credit it deserves. It's got the best fighters, in that division, pound for pound generally. So he wanted to be known as the pound for pound number one. You're not even saying like I'm the greatest of all time. I just want to be ranked pound for pound number one, which, to be fair to him, he should be, because John Jones, while he's probably the greatest fighter we have ever seen and may ever see, in the last couple of years, he has not fought much. And his last fight, he arguably, he's been underwhelming, and then he arguably lost his last fight. So where Khabib's just been dominant through and through for the last few years. So I think, it's not unfair to say, yeah, maybe he should be, you could give him pound for pound title. And then Jones got upset about that. And, so there's a whole thing about him being upset about Khabib wanting to be pound for pound. But, it's like, don't worry, just go fight some more and prove it. You go to heavyweight, win your fights, and no one's going to argue with you over that. But okay, my comparison, I'm going to say Barry Sanders.
Sanders.
Yeah. So think about it. Okay. No, obviously Barry Sanders never won any titles, but MMA is not a team sport. But Barry Sanders was, the best at what he did at that time in his position, one of the best all time. Like if you're going to look at, who are your best running backs of all time, he's in everybody's top 5. And he stopped at the absolute peak of his own performance. Like he's the best at what he does, best at his position, arguably one of the, top, of all time, and just kind of hung him up, at his personal peak. And I'd say that's kind of similar to a Khabib. Obviously, again, MMA is it's not a team sport, so it's kind of hard to argue with titles, because then if you're with championships, I got to think, okay, well, who in what sport like retired after winning a championship but still at a high level? So maybe that's probably the comparison that kind of came to mind for me as far as like athletes that if you want to compare to a different sport.
Right.
But yeah, all right. Well, so we'll get on to let's get on to fitness stuff, I guess. Our politics and MMA sidebars. So today I did an interview. Actually, did an interview with Dr. Greg Hammer, which is really interesting. Array of topics, but the focus, which is kind of his focus, is kind of avoiding burnout, and especially dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and people either being overworked or underworked or stressed, and not there's a lot going on. And so he shares some really interesting tips on how to avoid burnout. And really like his philosophy. We had a really great chat. So without further ado, here is my interview with Dr. Greg Hammer. Everyone, we're here with Dr. Greg Hammer. He's a professor at Stanford University, a best-selling author, physician, and mindfulness expert. Dr. Hammer, how are you?
I'm very well, Ryan. Great to be with you.
Great to have you on the podcast. There's a lot of exciting stuff to talk about. So before we get into the meat of our discussion, we always like to ask our guests kind of a bit about their own fitness background. So maybe if you can tell us and our listeners a little bit about your own fitness background, what did you play any sports? What do you currently do to kind of keep yourself fit?
Sure. Well, I've kind of been a lifelong fitness enthusiast, starting with the interest of my parents. They were avid fitness people, very active tennis players, and just overall exercise enthusiasts. So I played competitive sports when I was young. I played ice hockey, I played tennis, always kept myself in good shape, even through busy undergraduate program and medical school. And at the moment, and I would say since I've been here at Stanford, which has been for 25 years, I've been an avid cyclist. I have a home gym, which is wonderful, especially during COVID.
Yeah.
So I work out either in my gym or take my bike out cycling most every day. And certainly physical fitness is part of my overall wellness program. And I've been a wellness junkie my whole life, I would say. And that includes sleep, exercise, and nutrition, which I think are really the bases of our overall fitness, which includes our spiritual fitness as well.
Awesome. So now, can you give us a little bit about your kind of professional background? Kind of what takes you to the point where you're writing a book, and specifically kind of focusing on that and on trying to keep people, I guess, healthy, especially through what we're kind of going through right now.
Yes, I would say that first of all, I've been a long time seeker of the truth, if you will, and have been a long time meditator. And about 10 years ago, I started having an epiphany, which was that there's really nothing to look for. It's really within us. Happiness is our true nature, and our experience as we develop from being a newborn, infant, toddler, school-age child, adolescent to adult really sort of veils our happiness due to a variety of constraints that help program our minds to have a negativity bias, to have an obsession with the past and the future, which may be maladaptive. So I started just realizing that all we need to do is be present in order to be happy, and happiness is really our true nature. And then we started a program at Stanford called WellMD, and I jumped on board with that shortly after its inception about 5 years ago. And so I've been very active in wellness for physicians, because burnout has been a growing problem in the medical profession, not just physicians, but nurses and other healthcare professionals as well. So my interest in burnout and wellness in the medical field, I started giving lectures on wellness and burnout. What are its drivers? What are its cures, if you will? And that sort of took on a life of its own. Then I had some sabbatical time, and I wasn't going to leave Stanford. I have a lab. I need to feed and water, and I love being here. So I had to decide what to do, and the lectures were really resonating with audiences. And so I just decided to write a book on wellness for healthcare professionals, and that kind of got the gain without pain concept in motion. And so that book, Gain Without Pain, The Happiness Handbook for Healthcare Professionals, is on Amazon. And there's a second one at the publisher, which is sort of a pocketbook version, Gain Without Pain, Your Happiness Handbook. And, I've been very involved in lots of radio, television interviews, podcasts such as yours, Ryan. And all of that has sort of reinforced that I'm doing the right thing. I'm very enthusiastic about spreading the message of wellness.
Well, that's a lot to unpack, and there's a bunch of great stuff that I want to get into. So let's start off kind of with the idea of burnout. So what do you mean by burnout?
Burnout, Ryan, I think can be most simply defined as emotional and physical exhaustion that comes from stress. Mm-hmm. The stress can be internal, external, if there is really a distinction. So burnout in medicine, I think the drivers are threefold. There are really three domains that drive burnout and also point in the direction of its remedy. And they are, first of all, the culture of medicine, and this is true in other workplaces and in the home as well. But the culture of medicine traditionally has been that we in the healthcare field take care of our patients at all costs to ourselves. The patient always comes first. We often put our own wellness burner, and eventually that's really unsustainable. We need to take care of ourselves first, and then we'll be better equipped to take care of patients. But that's been our culture, and also the culture has been such that we are not really encouraged to seek psychological help for ourselves, which, given the circumstances of our jobs and the life and death decisions that we make on a daily basis, we do need support at times. And so the culture has not really provided ready access to that without stigmatization. The second area where drivers exist is in the area of efficiency of practice. And we, like others, have endured greater pressure to see more patients every hour, to be subjected to quality metrics. And so we're given the charge of seeing more, doing more, but we're not necessarily given the infrastructure to do that. And so, for example, we're asked to see more patients every hour in our clinics, but we're not given more exam rooms, more technical support. And so our patients just end up stacking up in the waiting area. And of course, they're very unhappy about that. And they may give us bad reviews on our Press Ganey scores, for example, and then the administrators tell us our Press Ganey scores are going down, but that's because they haven't given us the tools to accomplish what they've demanded that we accomplish. So that's sort of efficiency. And the third domain is personal resilience. And this is really my primary area of interest. I think that it's really our leadership that is responsible for establishing the culture and practice efficiency, but it's our individual responsibility to learn how to be more resilient and happy in our professional and private lives.
So I actually have a couple of questions. Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
I can.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I had it muted. Sorry. So I got a couple of questions based on that. So first off, I guess so obviously what you're mentioning a lot deals with healthcare professionals, but do you find that that kind of philosophy also applies itself to just the average person? So just in general, I think that those ideas can find themselves into the workplace, where people seem to be kind of overworked and not necessarily doing something that they love to do, and the focus is all on efficiency and not as much on quality of life. And I guess the second question is then, as it relates to healthcare workers, how has COVID kind of amplified what was already an issue?
Sure. Well, yes, I think the elements of burnout, the drivers of burnout, exist in most walks of life, actually. So, the culture in our society has been such that people are stigmatized for seeking psychological counseling, for example. I think that's changing, but I think that does exist in the workplace and outside of the workplace for many people. And the culture is always in our society, at least, is work harder and harder and harder and try to accomplish more and more and get to the top. It's a fairly materialistic ethic, if you will. And also with regard to efficiency, yes, sure. It's actually quite interesting what's happening during the pandemic is that many people are working from home, and although that presents challenges, it also presents efficiencies, and I think that may end up enduring. In other words, there are sort of new normal elements to what's going on with regard to the efficiency of our working life. So yes, I think these apply to everyone, and certainly issues related to personal resilience. Stress is just inexorably part of life, and everybody experiences stress. And we can talk about acute versus chronic stress and what is adaptive, what is maladaptive. But yes, I do think, Ryan, these three elements apply to most of us in our working lives and to some extent in our home lives as well.
Mm. And then, so in the healthcare community, how has COVID has it become worse with COVID? What have you noticed? Like, what changes have you noticed as far as this is concerned when it comes to dealing with the pandemic and how it is in hospitals and in healthcare facilities and just amongst healthcare professionals?
Great question. There's really a lot of variability in how COVID has affected healthcare professionals. In the hotbed areas of COVID, which started out really in Manhattan and surrounding areas, for example, of course, the healthcare system was overwhelmed. So that presented a unique type of stress that I think none of us had ever experienced before. But however, in other areas of the country, things were quite different. We canceled elective surgeries. So that actually caused a slowdown in work life for many people who were involved in perioperative services. The operating room schedule was greatly reduced, and in many areas, people were underemployed. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of clinic practice, we had to shift to doing a lot of clinic visits online. And so that presented its own set of problems. And again, that may become part of the new normal as we've discovered in many cases, it's perfectly efficient and productive to see patients online.
Yeah.
But I would say that COVID has created a whole panoply of circumstances and a variety of challenges. They're not all related to being overwhelmed with COVID-stricken patients in the hospital, although that has certainly caused some challenges in many areas. But in many other areas, it's been quite different, where things have been slowed down and healthcare workers have been laid off, actually. So.
Yeah.
And then I think all of us in the healthcare profession and outside of the healthcare profession are experiencing stress related to COVID. Our minds want to go ahead to the future, and we tend to catastrophize and think of the worst possible scenarios, even though those scenarios will generally never come to pass. But that creates a lot of fear and anxiety in all of us.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, I've noticed myself, since it started, there's just been a generalized kind of underlying anxiety that's just always there. And it's like, and I can imagine, for my situation's not terrible, and I had a, decent work situation. So it's been manageable, but I can't imagine what it's like for other people who maybe don't have, as much stability, and not that I have all the, that much stability, but, I feel there just is this kind of generalized anxiety there. Has mental health changed since the pandemic? Has there been a noticeable change in the average person, or just generally as far as mental health is concerned?
I think there absolutely has, Ryan. As you suggested, there's a lot of pain and suffering in the world. So there's a certain global background resonance of pain and suffering and fear and anxiety. And of course, there are many elements to that. We all feel for those who are out of work, who are really having trouble making ends meet. We all feel the pain of those in the service industry who have had to shut down. And I don't know how many restaurants have shuttered their doors, probably for good. And there's so many other difficulties, having kids at home with online learning. Maybe there's a child with attention deficit disorder. It's just impossible and very stressful for families. So I think we all kind of have this shared anxiety and background of pain and suffering, not necessarily unique to our own particular circumstances. And then, of course, there are those of us who are really suffering, who have lost a loved one to COVID, and who may be out of work, who may not know how they're going to put food on the table next week. So, yes, I mean, this is a global situation, and I'm like you, perhaps. I feel very fortunate that I'm not so heavily afflicted as many others, but nevertheless, there's just a feeling of just anxiety and shared pain and suffering for all of us.
Yeah. So I guess let's get into your book. We get a little bit more into your book. I know you mentioned you talked about it. So I like the title. So my co-host Justin and I, we always talk about kind of the myth of no pain, no gain, in the fitness world. And that the idea, that it's said a lot. Like you always have to feel pain, and yes, pain is a part of it, but I think sometimes it's overused. But I'm just interested in why. What made you choose the wording of gain without pain, as part of the title of your book?
Well, that's a good question, Ryan. I would say that it's sort of several issues led to that. First of all, I'm an anesthesiologist and intensive care physician, so I try to mitigate or preclude pain, or certainly treat it aggressively. So sort of a no pain area of medicine, I suppose. At least that's the goal. And then also, I think that in life, things don't have to be painful. I mean, we can make progress spiritually, physically, and otherwise without suffering pain per se as part of our regimen. I think even with regard to working out, especially when you get to be a little bit older, you want to exercise to fatigue, but not to pain. If you're feeling pain in a joint or in a muscle, it's time to back off a little bit. So, and then I thought of an acronym for the essentials of resilience and happiness that I embrace, and wanted to come up with something simple that people could remember. And so GAIN just kind of appeared one day. And
Yeah.
GAIN is an acronym for gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. And I think those are the 4 pillars of resilience and happiness. And so all those factors kind of came together, and I had a bit of fun with it, and ended up with the Gain Without Pain title.
Yeah, no, it's great when something works out like that. So maybe, what can you walk us through? I guess 2 parts of the question is, one is, and you talked about it a little bit earlier, but really why happiness, why you find that to be so fundamental, I guess, is number 1, and then how those 4 principles will lead you to that. Like, how do you use those 4 principles to get to that point of happiness?
Sure. Well, I think happiness is all that all 7 billion of us on the planet want. If you really kind of drill down, we may want certain accomplishments or material possessions and so on, but really what we want is happiness. And we sometimes substitute objects or substances or relationships to try to get what we want, but really at the root of what we truly desire is simply happiness. And the good news is that happiness is our true nature. It's already within us. The challenging news is that it's veiled by our experience. And as we develop from a newborn, we acquire 2 fundamental ways of thinking. So the newborn is, we believe, just purely present and not concerned about the past or the future. A newborn is not presumably concerned about what happened 15 minutes ago when they were in their mother's womb, or what's going to happen tomorrow, where their next meal is going to come from. They're just present. And I think if we all go back to that kind of mind of a newborn, mind of a beginner, and consider just being present, that's when we're happy. If you think of all your happiest times, you are right there, right then. So if you're walking through a forest and you're, on a nice hike, you're getting a good workout, you're surrounded by beautiful trees and just that wonderful fresh air and a little bit of a breeze and sunlight shimmering through the leaves, you're not at that moment worried about the past or the future. It's something that brings you to the present moment. Similarly, with a very moving piece of music. So for me, that might be, a piece by Mozart, centuries old, yet still bringing me to the present moment with its beauty. And I drop any kind of obsession with the past or the future. And, having an intimate experience with a loved one, you can go on, but those times when you're really happy, if you think about it, you're just totally right there in the moment. So why is it that we don't have more of that? And it is that as we develop, we acquire patterns of thinking, and these are kind of explainable from a teleologic or developmental standpoint. We have to wean from our mom's breast and develop a sense of being a separate self, and this is mine, that's not mine, this is me, that's not me. And we have to learn from our mistakes, which puts us in the past, and we have to start to plan for the future, and we overdo it, it turns out. We become obsessed with the past and the future in ways that are maladaptive, and we forget how to be present. And so how can we get back to being present and endure and overcome these 2 qualities we obtain, which are a negativity bias? We tend to remember negative things and forget about positive things. And secondly, we get obsessed with the past and the future in maladaptive ways. So what does that mean? We're obsessed with the past beyond what's adaptive. What's adaptive about the past is learning from our mistakes and savoring our wonderful memories, for example. But beyond that, obsession with the past brings feelings of fear and regret and shame. And likewise with the future, it's adaptive to plan for fun times ahead and also make plans to put food on the table. But beyond that, our obsession with the future leads to fear and anxiety. The negativity bias, in combination with this obsession, causes us to catastrophize, to imagine the worst possible case, even though that rarely comes to be. So we need to remember our true nature and being present, and therefore resilient and happy. And that's what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is really a practice that allows us, through our breath initially and through contemplation of, I think, gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment, will bring us into the present moment. And that's really what we need to practice, just like working out. As we develop, if we want to run a marathon and we're not a runner, we have to start slow with baby steps and practice every day or according to a set schedule, and eventually we'll get there. And it's the same with practicing the skills of being present. And that's what the GAIN principles, I think, are laid out to help us with.
Well, it makes me think there's a great Neil deGrasse Tyson quote that we're all prisoners. I'm gonna might butcher it, but effectively, like, we're all prisoners of the present, in perpetual transition from an inaccessible past to an unknowable future. And I think it's a great quote because it is so true that we're always in the present. And it tends to line up well with my own kind of personal philosophy, of trying to find things that I call it satisfaction, but I think it's effectively the same thing. And it's, being in, it is having experiences that make you feel fulfilled. And I think we are stuck in a kind of very materialistic society, and we are so kind of it tends to be not focused on the right things. And you're correct, like in that, people are so, very much focused on what, what happened in the past and what's going to happen. But how, I guess, how do we affect change in society? Like, how do you, and part of the process is like writing a book and talking to people and hoping, that people hear your message. But like, how do you kind of shift that mindset? Because we do seem to be stuck in a society that is very much kind of the antithesis to those ideas.
I would say just go back to first principles, and that's where the GAIN principles come into play. So let's consider them. Gratitude. You can be deaf and happy, you can be blind and happy, you can be very poor and happy, but you will never see a person who's happy and ungrateful. Mm-hmm. So gratitude is really one of the founding principles of happiness and being present. Even with the pandemic, many people are suffering, but imagine what it was like 100 years ago in 1918 with the great influenza pandemic. It was so much more difficult then. 50 million people, give or take, perished. Access to good food, clean water, medical care were so limited. We did not have the ability, of course, to stay in touch with friends and loved ones virtually through the internet, as you and I are doing right now. So people were very isolated. It was just a horrific time. And if you fast forward to the present, even though things are difficult and there's a lot of pain and suffering going on, as we discussed, things are so much better than they were 100 years ago. And so we need to focus on that for which we're grateful and things we have rather than things we don't have. And when we do that, we can feel grateful, and that frees us from these obsessions with the past and future and helps us kind of come into focus in the present moment.
Great. So now you also talk in your book about sleep, and obviously that's an area that many people struggle with. But maybe if you can talk to us a little bit about how that affects us and what people can do to kind of to take advantage of it and or at least not allow sleep to kind of affect our lives negatively.
Sure. Well, many of us have problems with sleep, even under the best of circumstances, but certainly in the current pandemic, this sort of background vibration of fear and anxiety that many of us have interferes with our sleep. And in addition, working at home when our schedules are so disrupted, that causes impairment of our sleep also, because we really need to be on a schedule in order to sleep well. And so there are fundamentals of sleep hygiene that are well described. One of them is having a regular bedtime. So even though people may not be going to work and they can sleep in if they want and so on, I think it's really important to have a regular bedtime, to have a regular schedule in general with regard to meals, recreation, exercise, work, and sleep. Other elements of sleep hygiene caffeine. Caffeine has a very long half-life. So if we have 2 cups of coffee at 8 o'clock in the morning, that's equivalent to having 1 cup of coffee 6 or 8 hours later, so in the early afternoon. And then 50% of the caffeine that is in our body then is still present in the evening. And so we really have to watch our caffeine intake and reduce it. And I used to say, well, I'm not going to have a cup of coffee after 2 o'clock, but that 1 o'clock cup of coffee, half of that was still with me at 9 o'clock in the evening, and no wonder I had difficulty sleeping. Now, some people can have a cup of coffee and go right to sleep, but that's not me. Yeah. I think that's not most people. So caffeine, alcohol is another thing. Alcohol, people think it helps them fall asleep, and I would just say that it's not sleep. It's a drug-induced state of unconsciousness, which in the medical term for that is actually hypnosis. We're in a hypnotic state, which is not what most people think about when they think of hypnosis. But alcohol and sleep medications, whether it's an over-the-counter medication like Benadryl, which is in a lot of sleep preparations over the counter, or whether it's prescription sleep medicine, those chemicals interfere with normal restorative sleep. And so we are best counseled to avoid those. So caffeine, alcohol, sleep medications, although they may be useful on occasion, should not be a regular habit. What is it that we do when we're on or in our bed? We really should limit our bed for 2 activities, and neither of them are being on our computer or watching television or even reading a book, though I have to confess I do tend to lie in my bed reading a book in the evening. But so our bed is really for sleep, and so we need to associate it properly. So there are a number of elements of good sleep hygiene that are well described, and those are some of the common ones. And I think, especially in the pandemic, the first principle is really having a regular sleep schedule.
Yeah, you just gave me the perfect excuse, because for whatever reason, we have a TV in the bedroom, a TV in the living room. My wife always likes to lie in bed and watch TV in the bedroom, and I, for whatever reason, like to just sit on the couch and watch in the living room. So I'll use that excuse that when I want to, that it's not good for our sleep to watch TV in the bedroom anymore. Yeah. So hopefully that'll get me out of that. Well, it was great talking to you. So can you share just share the name of the book and information, and how our listeners can get in touch with you or find out more about you? Because definitely, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are going to want to check in with you. Sure.
My website, Ryan, is greghammermd.com, so lowercase GREGHAMMERMD.com. That has links to lots of media, interviews, videos, other messaging, and also a link to where they can find the book, which is on Amazon. And there's another book in the works at the publisher, which will be sort of a pocketbook version for everybody, where the stories that I tell in the book are not generally related to medicine, and that one will be called Gain Without Pain, Your Happiness Handbook. So people can learn about the other elements of gain, the acceptance, intention, non-judgment we didn't discuss this morning, but yes, greghammermd.com. Perfect. So we will definitely have back on when you have when the new book comes out. Would love that, Ryan. Awesome. Thanks a lot. Okay. Be well. All right. Thanks, you too. Okay. Bye-bye. All right, so that was a really great chat. Definitely anybody who is interested, check out his book, Gain Without Pain, the Happiness Handbook for Healthcare Professionals. All right, so Justin, I got a study for you today. So I'm sure this is a topic that we've talked about at some point. Have you ever thought about what happens if you only exercise one side, like just one arm and not the other? I have thought about that. Like we always had this joke, you're going to have like one really large arm or like one really large leg, or we always thought about that, but I guess intuitively we always knew that it was just silly to do that. Yeah. But maybe it doesn't really work like that. You can't just do curls in one arm. So you've seen people who've come from surgery. Well, if you have an injury where there's severe atrophy, let's say. Yeah. And yes, you can build one side stronger. But actually, so this study, it comes out of Edith Cowan University, and it was looking at what happens when you do exercise one side and immobilize the other. So what they did was interesting. So
And the question here, there's actually a legitimate question. So we kind of joke about, like, and we've seen it in like, Rick and Morty and other, other shows where like one person, you build just one arm is just massive and the other side is puny. But there's a realistic application, which is like, let's say if you have an injury, like what happens if you injure one side, and you can't use the other side, if you have surgery or whatever it is, that leaves, or stroke that leaves one side immobile. What happens when you do, you have a side that you can work? Should you work it? Should you not? Are there benefits? So what they did, so it was a study that took 30 people, and they basically had one arm immobile for 8 hours a day. And then they were divided into 3 groups. So group 1 did no exercise at all. So they didn't do any exercise at all. Group 2 did a mix of concentric and eccentric exercise. So concentric, you think of as, I always go to a bicep curl. On a bicep curl, the concentric part is when you curl. So when you flex your arm, when the muscles are actively shortening. And then the eccentric portion would be when you're extending the arm back down. So there's the second group did a mix of concentric and eccentric exercise, and then a third group did eccentric only. So just to give a brief little explanation between the concentric and eccentric. Eccentric training, so what's happening is you're lengthening the muscle with resistance. So one of the benefits with eccentric is you can use heavier weight, because if you think about it, if I start at a curl and I have a heavy weight, I can control that weight down, to some extent, easier than I can lift a really heavy weight, because you're still, there's an element of control. And so you can slow something down or decelerate something faster or more controlled than you can accelerate, a similar weight. So there have been plenty of studies that show that eccentric training is really good for building muscle strength and muscle size. So just kind of a little sidebar with that. But then, okay, so the 3 groups. So what they found was that the concentric only and the eccentric only and the mixed groups both increase strength in both arms. So interestingly, both the arm, the working, but also the arm not working. And the eccentric only group did it significantly more. Additionally, the eccentric group led to, so basically there's muscle wastage, which is how much atrophy happened over that period of time. So in the group that did no exercise, there was a 28% loss of muscle mass during that time, where the eccentric only group only lost 2% muscle mass. So, we don't know why. Why is it that the opposite side benefits? I'm sure there's some part of it is a neuromuscular benefit, and there's some cross wiring in the brain. But but again, like that's something that we'll need more to find out, like what's the actual mechanism at play. But it is interesting that the joke of working one side, will only build one. Well, no, you may actually help the other side. So there is a benefit there. So for example, if somebody has an injury that requires a limb to be immobile, there may be benefits to prescribing an exercise program where you're using the other side. So, if you break your arm, or if you're in a situation where you can't use your right arm for 2 months, then you may be beneficial to specifically focus on working the left arm in order to help build strength, but also minimize the loss of muscle. I can even think of a client I had recently who had to get wrist surgery, and how this would help, because basically that the side that had surgery needed to be immobile, and she could not use that side for months as far as exercise is concerned. So using the other side could potentially help, again, strength, but also possibly decrease the wasting of muscle.
That's interesting.
So interesting. So something that we normally think of as a joke, actually is pretty useful. And I've read about that before. Yeah.
Why that would be, like, what is going on in the brain?
I don't know. So, and then there's another thing is like, this doesn't look at like motor control. So like another interesting thing will be to look at, like, let's say, for example, I write right-handed, I'm athletically left-handed, but like I write right-handed. So we'd say writing is precise. I'm not very good at it, but let's say there's, writing is a precise kind of fine motor skill. If I damage my right hand to the point that I can't write with the right hand, will writing with my left hand transfer over to maintaining some of my writing technique with the right hand. So that wasn't part of this study, but that's another interesting thing, is like, can you keep, if you're immobile, can you maintain certain motor skills with the other side by training them? So I don't know the mechanism. I know that there are certain things like, just thinking about, and this goes back to some of the motor skills, but thinking about, a movement, let's say it's swinging a baseball bat, will fire it will fire a lot of the neurons that would be involved in actually doing it. So a lot of times, like that's why visualizing can help, and why kind of thinking things through, like when you're going to sleep, if there's some move or something you're trying to work on, actually thinking it through can help you do the movement better. Maybe it's connected to that, but we really don't know. And it's one of those things that, we'll need more studies to figure out why it is that working one side, doesn't, helps the other. It could be that maybe when you're doing one side, you're also creating, very small kind of micro contractions in the side that's theoretically not working, that is helping to maintain and or build strength. So yeah, no, there's a lot involved that will, I'm sure there'll be more studies figured out. But again, it's an interesting thing for rehab and rehabilitation programs that might really necessitate like working the opposite side in order to build strength in the side that you can't move.
Oh, that's interesting.
Cool.
So, well, what are the last two things you've actually written with a pen, besides signing your name or tallying up a tip on the check?
Oh, last two things I've written.
Or last one thing besides either signing your name or writing a tip on a check.
I can't think.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, besides like filling out a form, I can't think of the last time I was taking notes for something recently, but I forget what. Yeah.
It's funny how it's become basically a lost skill. Right.
I mean, it was never a skill of mine to begin with, so I'm okay with not necessarily having it. All right, so we have an Ask the Trainer. So hold on one. Oh wait, actually, all right. So I'm gonna set. I'll set up.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Oh, give me permission.
Let's see.
All right.
I'll have to edit that.
Yeah. All right, so we have an Ask the Trainer. So Justin, why don't you ask me the question? I'll try to answer to the best of my ability.
All right, so today's question comes from Shamir. Hey, Shamir, thanks for writing in. And the question is, hey guys, I have a question about heart rate. I'm struggling to get my heart rate up during aerobic work. I've been a regular weightlifter, but recently I've decided to include cardio in my program. I tried a few boot camps. I've tried running. I've tried high intensity interval. And no matter what, my heart rate seems to max out at 120. My target heart rate is supposed to be in the 155 range. Any thoughts? Thanks for all the great work you guys are doing. And thanks you once again, Shamir, for writing in. And perhaps you are a cyborg.
There's a few follow-up questions I would have there. I guess one is, how are you measuring it? Two, have you tried alternative methods of measuring? Because the first thing, I would say is, and then, the third question would be then, on if you were to do your own kind of perceived exertion, so like RPEs is rated perceived exertion, which is your kind of subjective interpretation of how hard you're working. Where do you think you are? So let's just say, for example, that 155 is like an 8 out of 10, just to make things nice and simple. Do you feel like you're getting to an 8 out of 10? So if you feel like you're getting to an 8 out of 10, I would think then the issue is with the method of measuring, that there's something wrong with that. Maybe you're using an Apple Watch that's not, and generally my Apple Watch seems to be pretty accurate, but maybe you're using one that's not getting the right number, or maybe using a heart rate monitor that's not working, or whatever the method is you're using, it might be off if you feel like you're working that hard. if you don't feel like you're working that hard, so if you feel like no matter what you do, you're always at a 6 out of 10, yeah, you might be a cyborg, or you're not working hard enough. So you might need to, whatever you're doing, do things faster or try to work harder. It doesn't sound like that. Like it doesn't, there wasn't a complaint that like in the email, it didn't say like, I'm not working, it feels easy. You're not writing like, yeah, I'm running up the Empire State Building and it feels like nothing, just, it sounds like you're working hard. Just the number on the monitor is not, correlating to the work rate. But again, I could be wrong. So again, the first question or first thing to consider is alternative methods of measuring, see if it's accurate. The second part is, do you feel like you're working that hard? And then third part is, look, if you feel like you're working really hard and you're only hitting 120, then that becomes a little tricky. So the things you might need to do, it might be then, that part might be your own kind of tolerance for, the activity is a little bit lower. So maybe it's like when you get to 120 or what, that's really hard for you and you just have a hard time pushing past that, in which case, again, there are other factors. So depending on your age and your health history, there are a lot of variables there. So it's hard to say, where the block is. Like for example, like if I'm training somebody who's 20 years old and they get to 120 and they're struggling and having a really hard time, the perceived exertion is really high at like a 120 heart rate. If they're a person that's new to exercise, then okay, we work on that and we just try to push that over time. So you might just try to push to 122 and push to 124, 125. If it persists, I would suggest maybe just going to see a doctor to see if there is any issue there, because that is a fairly low number to be stuck at. So, that is a situation where you might want to get it checked out. But again, if the person is, 65, then there's different calculus involved. So 120, that might just be, the number that we're trying to work with, and maybe, we stay around there. So there are a few questions involved, unfortunately, before saying, for sure, like what I would do. But like I said, check to see what you're using. Think about your perceived exertion. And again, if everything is checked, like you're just having a hard time at 120, again, just slowly try to build up. And if you're reaching a sticking point you can't get past, might be worth seeking a professional out and see if there's, some underlying condition that is keeping you at that number. All right. Well, thanks again for the question. And, as usual, shoot us an email at thegymwits@gmail.com. We try to answer all the questions that we get. So Justin, I guess that is it. Anything else to add for today?
Oh, I think that's it.
Cool. All right. Well, as usual, check us out at thegymwits.com. Check us out on social media. Again, we're trying to keep this going more consistently.
From this point forward.
From last week forward. Hopefully, this will be 2 weeks in a row that we've published. And that is it. I'm Ryan George.
I'm Justin Guild, aka Chef Sonic, reminding you that truth does not sell.
And we are the GymWits.